Hey everyone, it's Professor John McKinney here. In this video this week, we are actually talking about professionalism and client meetings, right? And how to be professional in the workplace. The really cool thing about this topic is that it actually relates to how to conduct yourself in interviews, or when you're meeting colleagues for the first time, or just any time that you're meeting with someone, right? And how to represent yourself well in the workplace. So in this video, I have a friend and colleague that I used to work with when I owned my own consulting company. His name's DQ. So yeah, let's dive into this video and see where the conversation takes us. DQ, how's it going?
How you doing? Long time no see, huh?
I know it's been a while. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, we're both trying to navigate this academic world and get through that. But yeah, everything's going well. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well, so for everyone, I guess, kind of watching in this video, even though it's not posted yet, so that sounds kind of weird saying it. So, DQ, do you want to just kind of introduce yourself real quick and what you do and
Yeah.
where you live? Yeah.
Yep. So I'm DQ Spencer. I'm a professional in HR. Right now, I'm a professor at Minnesota State University. My background is in HR, so I have about 15 years in HR before I started teaching. I have my bachelor's in HR, my master's in HR, and my doctorate in HR. So some of the things that I like to specialize is the generational theory, axiology, which is kind of the study of values and how to increase engagement in the workforce and in the classroom. So that's me in a jiffy.
Yeah, man, that's great stuff. And I know you and I met back when I had HR Outfitter, which I just recently shut down.
Yeah.
You were the first consultant that I brought in to work with us that I didn't previously know, right?
Yeah.
And so we got to know each other that way, doing consulting with the outdoor adventure industry, writing policies, handbooks. We went to Las Vegas together, right?
Yeah. We did a lot of events, so that was cool too. It's fun, we have I think we have a little bit of different background, but the same background, right? You're very outdoorsy, you probably cut down your own trees and make your own firewood. I don't, right? I turn the thermostat up, and that's about the best I can do.
But yeah, we went to a couple conferences together and presented together to the outdoor space. And just throughout the time working with you, I've been fascinated with your professionalism and how great you are to work with. So that's why I wanted to chat with you on professionalism. So
yeah. I mean, for me, when I hear professionalism, a lot of people will kind of associate that with lack of fun, right, and lack of being yourself. But that's something that ever since I was younger in my career, after I graduated from college, I tried to enter in the HR business with trying to assimilate and do everything the way everybody else was doing it. And I wasn't myself, right? So it was professional, but it was an awkward professionalism, right? So as I grew and matured in my profession, I learned more tips and tricks just to kind of, hey, be yourself, but still get the job done, right? Be yourself and still meet or exceed the professional standards, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. No, I don't think anyone wants to work with like a cookie cutter HR person.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, not anymore, right?
It's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess kind of the topic, I'm not quite sure what to call it yet, because I'm thinking like professionalism, right? But it kind of also turns into like self-branding, right? Like how you represent yourself, how you conduct yourself in meetings. I mean, I guess like professionalism covers that, but professionalism is like such a broad term.
It's very broad, very vague. Kind of what you talked about. Just start with being a brand, right? So when you're your own brand, I mean, you represent yourself, but you also represent the company. So whenever I do, let's say I'm going out to meet a client for the first time, or going out to work with a business partner that we've only emailed and I'm meeting for the first time, the old cliche, you only have one time to make a first impression, right? So
Yeah.
I do my best to be as prepared as possible, right? Whether that's looking up interesting things, interesting facts about that client or that business, or just little things like, how is the dress there? And what's appropriate to wear to our first meeting? That's a big thing. I've been on both sides of the spectrum where I came overdressed and like a
Yeah.
three-piece suit, and they're wearing jeans and a polo, and I came underdressed wearing jeans and a polo, and they're wearing suits, right? So it's very embarrassing, and I think that was because I had a lack of preparation, right?
Mm. Yeah. So, yeah, no, that we'll get into like what to kind of wear later. And I think you touched on it with the research because
Yeah,
I've also had where I'm like way too dressed
yeah.
and, sometimes underdressed, right? So, underdressed, like I'm wearing enough, sort of,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, just enough. Yeah, yeah. No, and,
Um,
and and yeah, like you said, a lot of that is preparation, and those little things they do matter, right? They do
yeah,
matter until you get that familiarity with that client or that business. You'll always be trying to impress them, always be trying to brand yourself in the most positive light as possible. Yeah.
sure. So you sort of touched on it a little bit, but when you're preparing for like a meeting with a client, when you're doing consulting or I guess maybe any meeting in general, like what kind of things do you do to like prepare? You said you do some research. Are you doing it like
Mhm.
online? Are you preparing questions or like what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, for the first time, I mean, I almost, I hate to say this, but I almost treat it like an interview, right? So I'm doing my research on the company. If I have the open line to talk to somebody who's already in that company or that business, or already talked to that client, ask them a little
Yeah,
questions like talked about, what do you guys wear in the office? What do you wear in the office? What's the topic do you want to meet about? What's the specific topic, right? So then I can understand, we're talking about this, we're talking about this, we're talking about this. And that helps me focus too. Last thing I want to do is go into a place and I'm prepared for this topic, but they ask me something that I'm not prepared about. And the last thing they tell me, I don't know, or let me get back to you. I want to say that so many times, right? And that's first meeting. I wasn't prepared, right?
yeah. I didn't. I mean, I know when I go to meetings, it helps when there's like an agenda ahead of time,
Yep.
but most of the time that doesn't happen, or at least not in my experience.
Hmm.
And so I'm like, can you just like, what's the title of the meeting? Like, can you just get like a brief? Tell me what it's about.
Yeah.
That way I can be prepared because, someone told me one time early on in my career, I was working in an outdoor company up in Minnesota in Ely. And I was working as, yeah, one of my favorite states. But I was working as like a training manager and going to these meetings right with other managers.
Hmm.
And my boss said, even if you like don't necessarily have any updates, like at least have like 2 to 3 bullet points that you can have to like share with the group,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like, even if you don't have anything for the meeting, like if you're getting invited to a meeting where you don't feel like you have anything to add and you're more of like a viewer participant, maybe, right? Like still have stuff there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
About.
It's better to be over prepared in that sense than to come up there and I don't know. I mean, then if you don't know a lot of stuff, then what's your purpose? What's it? A lot of times when you meet with someone, especially a client or someone that you're looking to network with and expand your network, someone that can add value to your network, their time is very busy, very valuable. So if you go in there, what do you want to talk about? What do you want to talk about? What can we talk about? Have things that you want to really address. Have things that the client or the business values and see passions in, and you can align your passions and grow and build that network and build that familiarity. And so you guys can become networked, right?
Yeah, for sure. So with my students, right, part of the reason why we're having this video, right, discussion is because in the course that I teach, the capstone course, our students work on a project with a real company, typically someone local, but it could be someone far away, and we meet over Zoom. And the students having client meetings, right? And for some of the students, it's the first time they're meeting with, you know, professionals in a boardroom or in a executive conference room. What I mean, there's I think one thing to talk about is like kind of what to wear, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and so I would just say for the students, like this is what you wear, right?
Yeah.
Like you're a guy, I would not wear a full piece suit, right? I would wear like slacks, a buttoned up shirt.
Yeah.
If you want to be fancy, throw a tie on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or a sports jacket, right?
Exactly. And, you know, so like, business casual is what they should wear.
Yeah.
The-
Unless it's predefined, right? But for the most
Correct.
part, if you're going into a business that's professional,
Yeah.
if you have no idea, just like you said, business casual.
Yeah. I think that's a safe bet, especially for the students that I'm working with and the companies that we're working with.
Yeah.
Um, Business casual. And then when you're going to a meeting, right? Like how early do you try to get there or log on or
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. So it takes me back to my college days at MSU, where I got my bachelor's. My football coach said, if you're on time, you're late. If you're 5 minutes early, you're on time. So especially if this is your first meeting, you want to try to show that you're reliable, you're consistent.
yeah.
Yeah, and you do what you say you're going to do. So at least 10 to 15 minutes early. I typically, if it's my first meeting, I wouldn't want to go, less than 15 minutes. Just because if they come up early, if they come on early and it's going to be multiple people, you can develop a little bit of rapport with someone that's already there and kind of talk to them and get a feel for it too.
Yeah. And with that, I would say, beforehand, like Google how far where you live is or like how far it is. Don't just assume it's like 10 minutes away because it could be 15.
Yep, that's kind of the included in being prepared, right? In
Yeah.
everything, right? And there are so many resources and assets out there that you can look up, Google or anything to say, hey, what's the best preparation for first meetings or first business opportunities or interviews? They'll tell you the research questions so you understand the businesses, the strong points, and even talk about the opportunities. And what I like to do, especially if I'm going to a client, I like to link their opportunities with one of my skill sets or what I bring to the table, right? I noticed that
Yeah.
you're low on this, or you guys can use help on building your organization development change plan. I actually specialize in that, bring something to the table that add value. And if they're talking to you about some stuff, bring knowledge of it. If there's something that they're going to inform you about, understand the basic concept of it. And that goes with anything. Like even when you're teaching, you'd love for your students to come in like, hey, I know that concept. I understand what you're talking about. That allows you to be more comfortable and to dive into the topic a little bit more and develop that tighter network and rapport.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I have listed like a couple steps of a meeting. These are just some things that I kind of typed out while I was thinking about it. So if you think I'm wrong, like it's okay to say like, John, you're missing something, right? Like,
It's not
or
wrong. I mean, there's different types of meetings, right? You're never wrong, John. I've never known you to be wrong.
well, thank you for that, but sometimes I'm wrong. So, so I kind of outlined for steps of the meeting is the first thing is to introduce yourself, right? Like I think you said when you first meet someone, like first impressions are key. In an interview, in a meeting, when you're just meeting a new coworker, right? Like introduce yourself. Don't assume everyone knows who you are. So,
Yeah.
the second thing that I put, which I maybe this is my Southern hospitality, right? Since I'm from Tennessee. Is that I would say early on, like after you introduce yourself, thank them for being willing to meet with you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank them for being willing to meet with you. The third thing I have is like to once you get through that, right? And sometimes that includes to be like a couple minutes of small talk,
Yeah.
right? In that introduction side, it's
Yeah.
not just like, "Hi, I'm John. Thank you. Let's talk about this,"
Yeah.
right? Let's talk about
Let's get down to
whatever.
business. Yeah. It's not like that. Or it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, but once you kind of get through those steps, I think it's important to like define the purpose of the meeting and kind of like the objectives
Mhm.
for the meeting, right? Um, for my students, when they're in these meetings, right, they're going in as consultants to these companies, right? Like everyone's aware of what's happening. But what we want to see is like the students to kind of like take the charge in these meetings and be like, hey, we're going to be working with you on this project. This is what we're looking at. We're really excited about it. Which kind of leads to the next thing is like, then ask them about the company and kind of the topic, right? And then like, listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. 2 ears, one mouth, right?
exactly. Like people love talking about themselves or their companies or things that they're involved in, right? Um, and so get them talking about the company. Because if you're a consultant going in, right, or even an interviewer, if you listen to what they say, you can learn a lot more than what you
Yeah.
found out on their website.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, and that's happened. Not to cut your beautiful list off, which it's
I don't
perfect
know.
so far. Um, that's happened to me quite so often where I've been prepared about certain topics where we've discussed this previously on the phone with the client. Hey, we're gonna talk about this, this, this. Here's what I can do, and then I'll get them talking about themselves, and they kind of discuss another issue or problem or concern or opportunity that to me it has more importance than what we've talked about. So then I'll switch gears and go right into that and all the stuff that I worked on. We can save that for another day. I want to address this right away, right? And then you have to have that knowledge of what you do, like if it's HR, what
Mhm.
HR is doing, what the purpose of HR, what your main role is. You have to have some knowledge and information about the business that you're trying to support. So
Yeah,
if
100.
you don't, yeah, you won't be able to continue that conversation.
Yeah. Sometimes just step back and listen, right?
Yeah,
And you can learn a lot more about the organization. And because in these meetings, even if like let's say we're talking about employee relations or culture or whatever, once people start talking, you could think they're talking about culture. What they're really getting down to is how to retain staff, right? Like because there are so many things are tied closely together. And so you can think of, oh, so if we're you do a consulting project with them, right? Like we're going to look at culture, but how does that into retention, right? You get down to what they're really wanting. Um, so let's see. Going back to the list is with that, make sure to repeat, what you have learned from them to make sure that you clearly understand. And then another thing is that like if you're working on a project with someone or kind of like looking in the next direction for things, maybe offer a few ideas to gauge how they feel about your ideas. Because you could have an idea and then just read it to them and see if you're like on track or not. So um then the last thing I have is to ask questions. And then when you end the meeting, make sure that you have like a wrap up plan, right? Don't like
yes,
have this really great meeting and like the last like a couple sentences is awkward, right?
yeah,
Um, plan, plan, follow up and again for the time, kind of recap where you're at and what you as your group is going to do or what you as an individual is going to do. And maybe, tell them the plan on when you'll hear from them again,
yep,
right?
yep.
Uh,
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. Yeah, I
yeah,
agree with that wholeheartedly.
yeah. So, I mean, does that sound like pretty straightforward, or anything you'd add to that, or?
I think it's straightforward. I love the fact that you talked about having that exit plan and it's about those checkpoints, right? If you're trying to really develop a network and some familiarity with the person, you got to touch base. You can't let them forget about you or you forget about them. And one of the things that I like to do in meetings, I like to take notes, right? I'm taking notes right now, or you have a computer. I think a lot of people appreciate that. It really amplifies the persona of your listening. It's like, oh, he listens. And then like right now, my mind is always racing. Like when you're talking, I'm thinking about what you just said, then think about what you're going to say, and think about this. And so I take notes so I can always come back to it, right? So kind of talking about your assignments when you said the student meetings and you want them to take charge, they have to be prepared to do that. You can't just go
Yeah,
into the meeting and say, I'm just going to wing it. You know what? Here's what we're going to talk about. And then I'm going to go to this. Then I'm going to go to this. Then I'm going to go to this. Um, and if the client or the customer or the business chooses to elaborate on one of those things or needs more detailed explanation, then you'd be prepared to talk about that, right? It
yeah,
shouldn't be a lot of awkward silence, especially if you're going in to present something or if you're going to discuss something. If you're calling a meeting, even if they're calling a meeting, it shouldn't be awkward silence, right? See, right now we're meeting, we're just chatting, but I mean, what you're offering, your input is so valuable. So that's something you need to know. Take notes. For me, I'm kind of old school with notes. I like pen and paper, but a lot of people will do laptops when I'm in there. I can't read my writing afterwards, so after the meeting, I just have to throw it away. But whatever you need to do to show that you're engaged in the conversation, prepared, Um, like you said, repeat what they say. That's how you really ensure that you're going to address everything. And you do that by looking back at your notes. Say, okay, we talked about this an hour ago, this, and this, and then have, like you said, your exit plan or your strategy, your communication strategy. Uh, After reviewing A, B, C, D, I'm going to work on these things. I should have this complete by this time. I'll touch base with you on this day. Let's plan to meet this time. So if you're able to, always try to schedule that next meeting while you're there, right? While you're talking to them. That really helps keep the communication pipeline alive.
Sure. Yeah. So with, in these meetings that my students have had, they've actually turned out really great because about 15 to 20% of my students have actually gotten jobs at the places they've
Oh,
done
that's
these
really high.
conferences.
That's really high.
Yeah. And when I did the math, I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. Did they
Right.
pay your commission, your dues?
I can't talk about that.
Okay, yeah,
No, the no, I mean, well, from a teaching standpoint, right? Like, I think that's the most rewarding part, right?
yeah,
Like, it's helping
yeah.
people get into that next step. But one thing, and this is what I tell students, I'm like, if you don't work for the company, but you're doing like a consulting project like this, or even if you're just, doing some consulting with a company in general, right? Like, could be an interview, right? Like, you
Yeah,
don't know it.
yeah,
So, don't just think it's an assignment for a class, right? If you're one of my students, like, just think of it as an assignment. It's like a people interview,
yeah.
right?
An
Like,
opportunity, right? Yeah,
it's cool.
yeah.
It's a great way to get yourself noticed in front of these like heads of HR and other business leaders. So,
I love it.
yeah. So the last thing I have is, and I don't have a script or anything written out for this, but horror stories, right? Like,
Yeah,
so we've talked
I was
about,
thinking about it. I got one for you.
we've talked about like good stuff, right? How to prepare, getting there on time, like dressing appropriate. Um, horror stories. You got one ready? Go for it.
I got one. I was taking notes. Talking about the introduction, right? When you're meeting somebody, you want to introduce yourself. Don't assume that they know who you are. Hi, I'm DQ Spencer, blah, 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 right? Um, as we all know, COVID was a big disruptor. I'm a handshaker, a hugger, whatever you want to do. But with COVID, it's, you know, it, everybody's different, right? So, there was one time where I went in for a handshake and one of those hugs, and the guy and girl, they totally just backed away. And it's a little embarrassing, especially if you're going on somebody's home turf. So the thing I can say is kind of read the room, right? If you don't really see people shaking hands or, you know, making contact, read the room, right? Make that good introduction, but don't be awkward like I was. Right? So read the
Yeah.
room. They're not shaking hands, and you greet them the way that they choose to be greeted.
No, that's good. One time, with like these meetings with the students with clients, right? I had a student show up like 10 minutes late to the meeting, and I don't know if I should say this on a video. I'll figure out a good way to like beat around the bush. But
Yeah,
they were at someone else's house, lost track of time, and then didn't go by their house and get changed first. And so they were wearing like someone else's like oversized t-shirt. Like, so I was like, no, like, come on, be prepared, like, take it seriously.
that's it's that's beyond unprofessional. It's disrespectful. Someone else's time.
Right. Yeah. But I had another time where we were in a meeting, right? And the students were like nervous, right? I know they were nervous, right? Like, sometimes it's the first time meeting with professionals, and like you said, you're on someone else's home turf, and uh, there was like awkward silence. Like, the client was expecting the students to take the lead. None
Yeah,
of the I don't think they talked ahead of time to define like, hey, out of the three of us, right, who's going to kind of maybe like take the charge sometimes, right, in different areas. And like, it was awkward silence. And one of the students actually leaned over to me and was like, I'm so nervous. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but like, just talk, right? Like,
yeah. And you know what? In my experience, 95% of the time, people are nervous because they're not prepared, right?
mhm.
Like you said, if they were prepared, had topics, had roles, discuss conversations, discuss, what are we going to fill this with? If we have awkward silence, what can we bring up? How can we show our value? Then they wouldn't have those silences and they wouldn't have felt as nervous, right? You're going to be nervous, but to be that
Yeah.
nervous, then that means you're not prepared.
No, I think that's great what you mentioned, especially about like roles, right? Like it's one thing to be like personally prepared, but especially if you're going to a meeting with a team,
Mhm.
if you all haven't at least discussed plan together for the
Yeah.
meeting, that's when, it's easy for you to think you're going to rely on one of your teammates, right?
Yep.
And thought they were going to rely on you, right?
Yeah, and that's social loafing, right? It's social loafing when you're in a team and you think, oh, if I don't do it, they'll do it. If they don't do it, I'll do it. And it turns out no one does it, right? And then the client or the business or the person or the interviewer knows that, right? They're like, okay, well, I can see you guys aren't prepared. Thank you for your time, right?
Sure. You got any other horror stories?
Not that I want to share. No, no, not that I want to share right now, but I got more.
Yeah. Feel like, I mean, there's plenty of horror stories. I mean, not just me or not just you, but just like in general, right? Like,
Well, yeah, but
like,
that's true. Yeah. You know,
like
what we should do. You should make a video just about horror stories. We can just talk about.
like a video series on
Yeah,
HR horror stories.
yeah, that'd be cool.
Maybe I'll add that to the whiteboard
Oh
for
yeah,
ideas.
oh yeah,
Well, I'll kind of share the last one for me. But I had a professional that always said like dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Um, so it was always when I was early on in my career, it was common for me to like go to meetings and like dress real nice. And like when I was an intern, like I reached out to a company and had like I had this plaque made for me, and I like put it on my cubicle so people like felt like that was my like
very nice,
permanent desk. Um,
very nice.
and
Yeah,
so I've always been prepared like that, right? And when I first started working in the outdoor industry, right? Like so I worked as a guide in the industry and started working in like corporate HR, and then I've kind of gone back to the industry, but in a HR professional um, role. The first time I went to like travel to the other side of the country to go work with this company for a week. I showed up and I was in khaki pants and a polo shirt, which I felt was like really underdressed because I came from private security where everyone was wearing a full suit and tie. And I was wearing, like khaki pants, polo tucked in. And I was like, this is really casual, right? And I show up and the first day and in the office, like the operations manager is wearing like a oh my gosh, I was gonna say Led Zeppelin. Is that the right name of the band? Is
there
it
was a
Led
band, there's a
Zeppelin?
band called Led Zeppelin. I don't know if that's the same band.
Yeah, yeah. So they were wearing like a Led Zeppelin
Good
t-shirt.
band.
And then was the like manager of the office. And then I run into one of the owners and he's working in a warehouse like where they're building stuff. And what's the number one rule if you're in a place like that? Right? Like it's wear closed-toed shoes.
Yeah,
And he was wearing a like a white just plain t-shirt, shorts, flip-flops. And I was like, I'm overdressed.
yeah. You were. They probably thought you were the CEO when you walked in.
Yeah, I think it made people a little intimidated. But I mean, that's just like going back to researching what you're
Yeah,
doing. Oh,
yeah,
I got blurry.
yeah.
There
And
we go.
I've had similar experiences. Almost yeah, same thing. I was overdressed, and probably my first job out of college, I was an HR generalist for a company. I'm not going to name it. And then my job the first week was just meet employees and network and talk to them, get familiar with them, let them get familiar with me. And after the first day, my boss comes to me and say, "Hey, how did it go, DQ?" And I said, it's tough. No one really wants to talk to me, right? And I came out that I was supposed to be dressing, wear a suit, tie, shoes. He was like, "Well, you see what they're wearing, you see what you're wearing, right? Um, wouldn't you be intimidated too?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, if you want to work with people, dress like the people you want to work with, dress like your employee base, dress like your customer base." And that really helps. And that helped. After that, people, flock to me. So it's about
Yeah,
making them feel comfortable too, just as much as you being comfortable.
yeah. After being there a while, I had to invest in like Patagonia
Yeah, yeah.
and stuff.
Some moccasins or something. Yeah.
Yeah, so that way I fit in. But yeah, no, it's just a couple horror stories. But I think the biggest thing is like don't be nervous, right? Like, be prepared, don't be nervous, and know that the people you're meeting with are human too,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So cool. Well, I guess any last, words of advice from EQ for students or people watching the video that you want to share, or anything, or
Yeah, yeah. Like what you just said. I'm gonna sound like a broken record here, but I mean the best thing to do when you're going to unfamiliar turf, be prepared, right? And that will mean different things for different meeting settings, in different meeting roles types. But understand the assignment, understand your purpose, understand your role, be prepared to fulfill that role.
awesome. Well, that's great. On that note, I will end it there because I can't top that.
Yeah, right.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have a great rest of the day. Okay.